What time is it? Say it's time for KP's Video News. KP's Video News.
That's right, folks.
It's KP's Video News, y'all.
That's right.
It's KP's Video News, y'all.
It's time for KP's Video News, y'all. And like I said, this weekend, I am definitely not celebrating the 4th of July, because 4th of July didn't mean a damn thing to my relatives. So, scratch that. Definitely not celebrating the 4th of July, but I will be celebrating Juneteenth, and I will be celebrating Emancipation Day, and I will be celebrating Martin Luther King's birthday, and I will be celebrating my father's birthday, and you know, my kids' birthdays and all that other good stuff. Anyway, on with the show. And this is something, you know, I'm trying to do a little history here this weekend, the Black history here, this so-called 4th of July weekend, and I'm coming up with this is a story that I ran across, and I already knew about Matthew Henson. However, I didn't know that Taraji P. Henson, the actress, is a relative of Matthew Henson. And some articles state that Matthew Henson was her great-grandfather, and others just say she was a relative of his. So I don't know really which one is to actually state, but I'm just going to say that Matthew Henson is Taraji Henson's P. Henson's great-grandfather. Anyway, the first Matthew Henson is the first African American Arctic explorer, and so he was up there, and actually he was the first American to reach the North Pole. And when I tell you the story, then you'll understand what I'm talking about. So Matthew Alexander Henderson. Henson, born in August 1866 and died in March 1955, one of American explorer that was with the Robert Peary expedition on 7 voyages to the Arctic over a period of nearly 23 years. They spent a total of 18 years on expeditions together. He is best known for his participation in the 1908-1909 expedition that claimed to have reached the geographic North Pole on April 6, 1909. Henson said he was the first of their party to reach the pole. And that is true, because Robert Peary got sick. He took ill, and he was not able to continue. He was not able to continue on with the expedition, but Matthew Henson was able to continue, and he was able to actually continue on to the North Pole, and he was also able to go there and plant the American flag on the North Pole. So, on with his history here. Henson was born in Maryland to sharecropper parents who were free people of color before the Civil War. He spent most of his early life in Washington, D.C., but left school at the age of 12 to work as a cabin boy. He later returned to Washington and worked as a sales clerk at a good department store. One of his customers was Robert Peary, who in 1887 hired him as a personal valet. At the time, Peary was working on the Nicaragua Canal. The first Arctic expedition together was in 1891-1892, and Henson served as a navigator and craftsman and was known as Peary's first man. Like Peary, he studied survival techniques, Inuit survival techniques, and that was a race of Eskimos in the North Pole. Anyway, in the Arctic. During their 1809 expedition to Greenland, Henson was one of the 6 men, including Peary and 4 Inuit assistants, who claimed to have been the first to reach the geographic North Pole. In interviews, Henson identified as the first member of the party to reach what they believed was the pole. He had gained widespread acceptance, but in 1989, they had somebody that tried to discredit him, of course. Anyway, Henson achieved a degree of fame as a result of participating in the expedition. And in 1912, he published a memoir titled A Negro Explorer at the North Pole. As he approached old age, his exploits received renewed attention. In 1937, he was the first African American to be made a life member of the Explorers Club. In 1948, he was elevated to the club's highest level of membership. In 1944, Henson was awarded the Perry Polar Expedition Medal, and he was received at the White House by President Harry Truman and Dwight Eisenhower. In 1988, he and his wife were reinterred at Arlington National Cemetery. In 2000, Henderson was posthumously awarded the Hubbard Medal by the National Geographic Society. And like I said before, he was born in 1866. His parents on a farm east of the Potomac River in Charles County, Maryland, and they were sharecroppers. And Matthew's parents were subjected to attacks by the Klan and other white supremacist groups who terrorized Southern freedmen and former free people of color after the Civil War. To escape from racial violence in Southern Maryland in 1867, the Henson family sold the farm and moved to Georgetown, then still an independent town adjacent to the national capital. And he had an older sister, Sister S, born in 1864, and two younger sisters, Eliza, and Matthew's mother died when Matthew was 7, and his father, Lemuel, married a woman named Caroline and had additional children with her, including daughters and a son. After his father died, Matthew was sent to live with his uncle, who lived in D.C., and the uncle paid for a few years of education for Matthew, but soon passed away also. Henson attended a black public school for the next 6 years, during his last of which he took a summer job washing dishes in a restaurant. His early years were marked by one especially memorable event. When he was 10 years old, he went to a ceremony honoring Abraham Lincoln, the American president who had fought so hard to preserve the Union during the Civil War and had issued the proclamation that had freed slaves in the occupied Confederate States in 1863. At the ceremony, Matthew, that's that Emancipation, 1863. That's where it was, 1863. But we didn't get that information. They didn't get it in 1865 in Texas. But it was 1863 when the slaves were freed. So that's Emancipation Day. Remember that. 1863. Juneteenth was 1865. It's June 19th, 1865. And this right here, you don't even got to pay attention to that no more. Just forget about that. I'm be out there popping no damn firecrackers and barbecuing and all that shit. Anyway, so at the ceremony, Matthew was greatly inspired by a speech given by Frederick Douglass, an escaped slave and renowned orator, longtime leading figure in the American black community. Douglass called upon blacks to vigorously pursue educational opportunities and battle racial prejudice. At the age of 12, the youth made his way to Baltimore, Maryland, a busy port. He went to sea as a cabin boy on the merchant ship Katie Hines, traveling to ports in China, Japan, Africa, and the Russian Arctic areas. The ship's leader, Captain Childs, took Henderson under his wing and taught him to read and write. So, but he explored, man. He was an explorer even at that young age, man. How old was he then? 12 years old. He was already on a ship, traveling all over the world, to China, Japan, Africa, and the Arctic as a cabin boy. Man, this guy here is amazing, amazing. While working in a Washington D.C. clothing store, Steinmetz and Sons. In November 1887, Henson met Commander Robert Peary. Learning of Henson's sea experience, Peary recruited him as an aide for his planned voyage and surveying expedition to Nicaragua. With 4 other men, Peary supervised 45 engineers on the canal survey in Nicaragua. Impressed with Henson's seamanship on that voyage, Peary recruited him as a colleague and became the first man in his expedition. After that, for more than 20 years, their expeditions were to the Arctic. Henson traded with the Inuit and mastered their language. They called him Mari Paluk. He was remembered as the only non-Inuit who became skilled in driving the dog sleds and in training dog teams in the Inuit way. He was a skilled craftsman, often coming up with solutions for what the team needed in the harsh Arctic conditions. They learned to build igloos out of snow for mobile housing as they traveled. His and Peary's teams covered thousands of miles on dog sleds and reached the farthest north point of any Arctic expedition until 1909. So, that's right, boy. When you're talking about this is what they had in that 1809 expedition to the North Pole. They had 22 Inuit Eskimos, 17 Inuit Eskimo women, 10 children, 246 dogs, 70 tons of whale meat from Labrador, and meat and blubber of 50 walruses, hunting equipment, and tons of coal. In February, Henson and Peary departed their anchored ship at Ellesmere Island, Cape Sheridan, with the Inuit men and 130 dogs working to lay a trail and supplies along the route to the North Pole. And wow. Yeah, I'm telling you, man, this is an amazing person. So Peary selected Henson and 4 Inuit as part of the team of 6 men who would make the final run to the pole. Before the goal was reached, Peary could no longer continue on foot and rode in a dog sled. Various accounts say he was ill, exhausted, or had frozen toes, and he sent Henson ahead as a scout. In a newspaper interview, Henson later said he was in a lead that had overshot the mark a couple of times. We went back, and then I could see that all my footprints were the first at that spot. And Henson proceeded to plant the American flag. The claim by Peary's team to have reached the North Pole was widely debated in the newspaper at the time. And of course, they were not going to give that black man the credit of being the first one to do anything. So they gave the credit to Peary. Oh, God. Anyway, the National Geographic Society, as well as the Naval Affairs Subcommittee of the House of Representatives, both credited Peary's team with having reached the North Pole. Others remain doubtful. A reassessment of Peary's notebook, noted by the British Polar, found it lacking in essential data, thus renewing doubts about Peary's claim. And so, hey, that's just, you're talking about some stuff going on during the Jim Crow era. So, I mean, it's like, what do you really, really, truly expect? So I'm telling you, man, it's really, really crazy out there. Really crazy. So, that's Matthew Henson, Taraji P. Henson's great-grandfather, explorer, North Pole, at the North Pole, sitting up there, discovered the North Pole. And this story here, I'm just going to do just a little bit of it. And it says American policing, a culture of violence in minority communities. And this guy here, former LAPD detective and the leading national expert, so-called expert, Tim Williams, dives deep into the police procedures, use of force, and wrongful convictions. And I'll read a little bit of it, and I'm gonna go on here. And according to a 2019 report, at least 85,000 law enforcement officers across the United States have been investigated or disciplined for misconduct over the past decade. I'll say that again. At least 85,000 law enforcement officers across the United States, this is in 2019 when this study came out, have been investigated or disciplined for misconduct over the past decade. Moreover, in minority communities throughout America, there have been an urgent crisis in policing since the 20th century, early 20th century. Presently, there is a perceived uptick in the media concerning improper police procedure and use of force, including killings of African American citizens like that of George Floyd in Minneapolis, Rayshard Brooks in Atlanta, Georgia, and Breonna Taylor in Louisville, Kentucky. While no two cases are alike, there is a universal set of rules that govern how police officers should use force. Tim Williams, the nation's leading expert on police procedure, use of force, and wrongful convictions, believes that unfortunately, in minority and white communities, law enforcement has a different approach as it relates to policing the respective groups. Also, if additional racial bias training isn't embraced, especially during the COVID-19 pandemic and for protests, there would be continued civil rights violations that would cost municipalities millions of dollars. The easing of coronavirus stay-at-home orders and the use of masks, increasing the opportunity of different types of policing, subjecting minorities to a higher probability of being stopped versus white counterparts. So I'm going to stop right there. Let's see. Well, I'll tell you what, I'm going to go ahead and continue this. A study of 100 million traffic stops by 21 state patrol agencies from 2011 to 2017 found that police had a lower bar for stopping and searching black and Hispanic drivers than they did for stopping white drivers. Research also shows that police are more likely to target and use unnecessary force against them too. Although deaths due to lethal force by law enforcement were a majority white, 52% blacks, 32% disproportionately had a fatality rate 2.8 times higher than whites. Also, black victims were more likely to be unarmed, 14.8%, than white at 9.4%, or Hispanic at 5.8% victims, per a 2016 study that was produced, and the perceptions of a few bad apples within the police departments are quickly being dispelled due to such data and video recording from cell phones and security cameras. Such visual evidence captures what appears to be a culture of violence and almost daily onslaught of misconduct by police officers, especially toward minority communities. So, in his timely debut book, A Deep Dive and Expert Analysis of Police Procedures and the Use of Force and Wrongful Convictions, Williams recounts his experience as a retired LAPD senior detective supervisor. He also applies that knowledge as a use of force, police procedure, and wrongful convictions expert in state and federal court involving criminal and civil rights cases across the country. So, said before, they talk about a few bad apples. Every time a cop does something wrong, something bad, they get to talking about, oh, he's just a bad apple. But it seems to me like the whole damn barrel is bad, because you got case after case after case after case of officers in the United States, and I'm gonna give you those statistics again. And they as a study of 100 million traffic stops, they stated that black people were more likely to be threatened, and the use of lethal force by law enforcement, and also at least 85,000 law enforcement officers. This is a study that concluded in 2019. 80,000 law enforcement officers across the United States have been investigated or disciplined for misconduct over the past decade. Moreover, minority communities throughout America has been seeing an urgent crisis in policing since the early 20th century. So, since 1900, You know, since they created these bogus, you know, prison farms and these and all the other things that they have out there with the school to prison pipeline and all these other things going on. So it's really bad. It's time for some reform. It's time for some real serious reform, folks.
What time is it? Say it's time for KP's Video News.